joy to gather together in worship of our great God. Over the years, I've had many friends who were fans of professional wrestling, the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. I can remember in college on my dormitory floor, John Cox would slam people against the wall or down on their beds because he was practicing. He was one of those professional wrestlers. My ministry back in Iowa, my friend Nick, he was such a big guy. He even had bought one of the world champion belts and kept it on display in his office. He was such a fan of the WWE. Me, I never quite understood the fascination. But then, many of my friends scratched their heads at my love of throwing a frisbee at a metal basket. Who knows why we like and enjoy the things that we do? Don't know if you follow any of that or not, but I find it interesting that a fellow by the name of Hulk Hogan, remember him? At the age of 70, this past December, Hulk Hogan, whose given name is Terry Jean Bollea, he and his wife were baptized at the Indian Rocks Baptist Church in Largo, Florida. Isn't that cool? He stated in a post on X, which used to be called Twitter, for those of you who do social media, total surrender and dedication to Jesus is the greatest day of my life. No worries, no hate, no judgment, only love. Isn't that cool? So you may be 70 years old today, and it is not too late to give your life to Christ. Now, the book of Genesis that we're walking through currently tells us of a wrestling match as unlike the WWE as could be. It's found in chapter 32, but I want to look at chapters 32 and 33 of the book of Genesis today, if you would like to follow along. If you were here last week, and if you weren't, let me catch you up. A fellow by the name of Jacob has spent 20 years kind of in a self-imposed exile to the east. Back actually with some of the family members of his ancestors. He's gotten married there twice, as a matter of fact. 4 if you count the handmaids. But he and his father-in-law did not get along very well, and after 20 years he had sought to return to his ancestral home in Canaan, in the Promised Land, and had been pursued by his father-in-law with a vengeance. But we ended last week with that being resolved. And if you remember, the last thing I said in my sermon last week, which I have to look at my notes to remember, so if you don't remember, it's okay. One crisis resolved, another on the horizon. And that brings us to today's story. Because the crisis on the horizon was Jacob's return where he was awaited by his twin brother Esau. And why had he fled 20 years earlier? Esau had determined to kill his brother. Nothing like a little fratricide to make a Bible story interesting. Esau was mad. So mad that he would kill his brother. And when we get to chapter 32, Jacob continues on his way back toward the Promised Land, back towards Canaan. But he sent messengers, we read in verse 3, ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in Seir in the country of Edom. Edom's a little bit southeast of the Dead Sea, if you will. And Canaan lies to the west and north of the Dead Sea. But he wants to make amends. He knows that if he's coming home, he knows that if he's going to be in relatively close proximity to his brother, that these tensions need to be resolved. And so Jacob sends messengers, tells Esau, Jacob has sojourned with Laban and he stayed there from now. He has oxen, he has donkeys, he has flocks, he has servants. And I've sent to tell you, my brother, my Lord, he calls him, that I might find favor in your sight. He's extending a hand to peace, that I might find favor in your sight. Let's put bygones be bygones, okay? Let's put the past in the past. Let's make nice, okay, Esau? Well, in verse 6, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Now, before we read the next verse, what do you think might go through Jacob's mind? He is coming to kill me. An envoy of 400 men to meet me? What if they're armed? What if they're coming as a war party? What if he is coming to fulfill his vow to take my life? And so verse 7 says this, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Fear. Jacob was gripped with fear. Now, I don't want you to answer audibly. I do want you to think for just a minute. What are you afraid of? What gives you cause for concern in life? Is it the threat of war on a big scale? Is it worries over an economy and how you're going to pay your bills? Is it that upcoming doctor's appointment and uncertainty over the diagnosis and subsequent treatment? Is it estrangement with those that you love? I don't know. What grips you with fear? What causes you to lose sleep at night? What poses a threat to you, to your peace? Jacob was gripped with fear. He perceived in this 400-man party with his brother a threat. And so what does he do? Well, in verses 9 to 12, he prays. Imagine that. You're in church and you're going to hear about prayer. Verses 9 to 12, Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and all of the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. Jacob reminds God of his promise. Did you catch that? He goes, God, you said, and you're a God of your word. You said I would prosper, and you told me to go home where Esau is. And so he asks for God's deliverance. Deliver me from the hand of my brother. I'm afraid. He reminds God of God's promise. He asks for deliverance, and he acknowledges his fear. He's just honest with God. Are you honest with God in your prayers? Or do you enter into the throne room of God where grace is to be found and make like everything's good? Just be honest. Jacob even goes so far, this liar, this deceiver, this cheat. Remember the things that we've studied about Jacob. If you've not been a part of this study, go back and read a little bit. Jacob was a little bit unscrupulous. No, Jacob was a lot unscrupulous. And he acknowledges before God, he says, I am unworthy of your loving kindness. I am unworthy of your faithfulness. I am unworthy of how you have blessed me and prospered me. Is it possible that there's a glimmer of humility here beginning to blossom in the life of Jacob? Has it taken fear of his very life to bring him to his knees, shall we say, and acknowledge his unworthiness and at the same time the worthiness of God? Well, he does something else. He sends presents to his brother. And we actually know his motivation for it. We'll see it here in just a little bit. You see, Jacob has actually become quite wealthy in regards to livestock and possessions over these 20 years. And so he takes goats and sheep and camels and cattle and donkeys, male and female of all, and he puts them in 5 different droves, and he begins to send them off Esau's way. And so the servants, the shepherds with the goats, get to Esau, and Esau says, what is this? It is a present from your brother Jacob. Oh, cool. And sometime later, the second drove arrives because Jacob sent them out separately. And Esau says, what is this, these sheep? And it's a present from your brother Jacob. And a little bit later, the servants who are bringing to him the camels arrive. And Esau goes, what is this? It's a present from your brother Jacob. And likewise with the cattle and the donkeys. Jacob is trying to what? Buy the favor of his brother. And he tells us so much. In verse 20, the latter part of that verse, he says, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. Do you remember why Esau was so mad at Jacob? Esau had stolen the birthright, the inheritance, what in that culture would have been his when Isaac died and would have come to him of property and possession, and stole from him the blessing of how God will work in and through you through the years to come. And so Jacob is sending him livestock and livestock and livestock, kind of saying, this was yours to begin with. I'm giving it back. Can we be nice? Can we get along? I will appease him, and he will accept me. Sometimes we're like that, aren't we? Interestingly enough, and I'm not going to spend time on it, when you get into chapter 33 and the 2 brothers actually meet, Esau will say, what's up with all these gifts? And Esau will say, God has blessed me too. Esau has become quite wealthy in regards to livestock and servants himself. God has been faithful. And says, I don't need it. And Jacob insists, and Esau receives the gift. Jacob, though, at the end of chapter 32, is not yet to Seir in Edom. He stops at the ford of the Jabbok River. The Jabbok is a tributary that will empty into the Jordan. He has sent his wives and children, his servants and his possessions across. And in chapter 32, beginning at verse 24, let me read these words for you. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore to this day the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. This little story even affects the diet of Jacob's descendants from there on. Isn't that interesting? But we enter into this wrestling match. It's not the WWE. This is not Hulk Hogan who appeared at the ford of the Jabbok River. We start out, a man wrestled with him. We then hear Jacob say, "I've wrestled with God." Who was this? Was it a man representative of God? Was it an angel who appeared from God? Was it God somehow manifesting himself in human form? Don't make too much of trying to discern the answer there, folks. It's not entirely clear. What is clear is whoever the man, angel, God was, this is a divine encounter, because Jacob recognized the hand of God in the wrestling match. And isn't it interesting that we still talk about that? We talk about wrestling with God in prayer. We talk about times of hardship and our wrestling with God. We still use that phrase today in our Christian endeavor. And we draw it from this story of Jacob in Genesis chapter 32. There's a couple of things that I would set before you here. One, notice that before it is over, Jacob is in excruciating pain. When his opponent says, "You have wrestled with God," or Jacob says, "I have wrestled with God and prevailed," I want to make sure I get that right. His opponent says, "You have wrestled with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob says, "I have seen God face to face and my life has been preserved." Notice that while in excruciating pain, his opponent says, "Let go of me." And Jacob says, "Not until you bless me." Let me put it this way. Jacob is holding on for dear life. Don't picture Jacob here, in spite of his pain, triumphing over God. Jacob is in extreme pain. I can see streams of tears coming down from his eyes. I can hear the sobs of pain. You ever had extreme pain? Ever had an artificial hip pop out and have to put it back in? I know someone sitting back here who's done that. Twice. Will you stop that, please? I remember being called to the hospital when we ministered in Wisconsin. A fellow from our congregation was taken to the hospital. He had chopped his hip out of socket. And they asked me to come back with him in the ER, and I'm there talking to him, praying with him, trying to keep him calm. The doctor comes in and I never heard that man scream so loud in my life. And I thought, I hope that never happens to me. That's Jacob. All right? He's not He-Man, master of the universe. He is the whimpering, crying man holding on for dear life to the master of the universe. Get it? And he says, bless me. And realize the greater always blesses the lesser. So in this divine encounter, whoever the opponent, God is blessing Jacob. And so I put it this way. Maybe this is another case of winning by losing. What? Well, did you ever hear Jesus say something like, whoever saves his life will lose it, and yet whoever loses his life for my sake will find it? Do you ever hear Jesus say something like, the first will be last and the last will be first? See, the interesting paradigm that God sets before us for our faith is oftentimes our winning comes by losing, when all we can do is hold on to God for dear life, because that's all we have strength for. And we prevail. And we prevail, and God blesses. And in this situation, God will give Jacob a new name. He changes it from Jacob to Israel. Now you probably know this, but what does Israel mean? He who strives with God. An entire people, the Jewish people, an entire nation, the nation of Israel, is known as people who what? Strive with God, who wrestle with God. And Jacob's descendants will be known as Israelites. But Jacob also then gets a chronic limp. The rest of his days, he's hobbled as a reminder of what happened at the ford of the Jabbok River when he encountered God face to face. Well, if you move on to chapter 33, dawn comes. Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So Jacob divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. And he put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But notice this, he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. I want you to notice that the cowardly Jacob now places himself between his family and his brother. Up to this point, he's always been in the rear echelon. He's always been back here where it's safe. But after his wrestling match, we find him in the front. And he goes to meet his brother, regardless of what might result. Has a change taken place in him? We'll find out. He's not perfect yet. But a change has taken place because of his encounter with God. He is not the man that he was. Jacob journeys on. We see some maturing taking place in his life. And verse 4 gives us reconciliation. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. A couple of commentators asked this question. Did Jesus possibly think of this story when he told the story in Luke 15 of the prodigal son? When the father ran to meet the son returning and fell on his neck and wept and threw a party? Maybe. Maybe not. Now, whether Esau had long forgiven Jacob, or whether the 5 droves of livestock had softened his anger, or maybe the sight of his brother after 20 years brought up affection within his heart, we don't know. All we know is that when Esau saw him, he ran to him and he embraced him and they wept. Tears of joy. That's what reconciliation does. When we are reconciled to God, when we are reconciled to one another, and to those with whom we have been at odds. Interestingly enough, though, Jacob still can't, apparently, be fully honest. Esau says, follow me to Seir in Edom, and Jacob says, okay, you go on ahead, but I've got all this livestock, and I got the little children, and we can't go too fast. I'll catch up with you. And Esau says, fine, and he goes home, and then Jacob diverts himself and goes to Shechem, which is in Canaan, which is where God told him to go in the first place. God didn't say go to Edom. He said go to Canaan. The land which I gave to who? Your grandfather Abraham, which is to be a possession for you and your descendants. And so when Jacob gets to Shechem, he buys land. Well, let me just read it. This is the very last paragraph of chapter 33, verse 18. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. He bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. El, God. Elohe, the God of Israel. He has been given a new name. And he settles in Shechem. And he builds an altar, a place to worship and offer sacrifice. And he devotes himself to the God who's given him a new name. As I thought about bringing this to us, I'm going to give you the text. I was going to read them, but I'm just going to give you the text due to time. You're probably familiar with the story in the book of Acts, chapter 9. You could read the whole chapter, but especially if you read verses 1 through 9. We have a fellow by the name of Saul who is seeking to find Christians wherever he may and bring accusations of blasphemy against them and seek their lives. But on his way to Damascus, he is blinded and he hears a voice that says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Paul says, who are you, Lord? To which the voice responds, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. And he cannot see, and for 3 days he fasts, he prays, he's blind until God sends a Christian by the name of Ananias to him. And he tells him what Jesus has in store for him. And the scales fall from his eyes. His sight is restored. His name is changed from Saul to Paul. And we know him as the Apostle Paul. But it took a pretty strong wrestling match that cost him his sight. Or maybe you've read in Luke chapter 5. Luke 5 is interesting. Peter and his brother Andrew, their friends James and John, had been out fishing all night on the Sea of Galilee. That was their profession. But they had had a fruitless evening, a fruitless night. They found nothing, or they caught nothing. And in the morning, here is this itinerant preacher, this rabbi, who wants to use their boat kind of as a floating pulpit. And he speaks. Jesus speaks from the boat to those gathered on the seashore. And when all is done, he tells them, go out and cast your nets again. And Peter says, oh man, it's been a fruitless night and I'm tired, but because it's you who tells me to do so, I will. And they catch so many fish that they can't even bring in the haul. And in Luke 5, it tells us that Peter fell down before Jesus and said, go away from me. I am a sinful man. He recognized in Jesus one whose presence he was not fit to stand in. And Jesus said, hey, come and follow me. And from now on, you're not going to catch fish. You're going to catch man. And Simon becomes Peter. Peter the apostle. Some of us, I wish all of us, have had that time where we wrestled with God by the ford of the Jabbok, or we were blinded by Jesus on the road to Damascus, or we fell on our face before a holy one who performed a miracle in our presence. and our name was changed, and our lives would never be the same. How about you? Have you wrestled with God? Have you encountered Jesus? Have you seen Him face to face and prevailed, or better yet, been spared? Have you been changed, radically changed? Is your life one of which it can be said, "Behold, the old is gone, the new has come"? Have you experienced the new birth change? There are so many who this morning across the land will sit in pews, say their prayers, go through the motions, but never be changed. I pray that you will, if you haven't already, wrestle with God, and that you will hold on for dear life, enduring even the pain that He might inflict on you spiritually as He dislocates your spiritual hip so that you get the point. And then find yourself blessed by Him with new life, never to be the same again. When Terry Jean Balea was baptized with his wife at age 70 recently at Indian Rocks Baptist Church in Largo, Florida, he tweeted these words: "Total surrender and dedication to Jesus is the greatest day of my life." Will you surrender? Let's stand and sing.
That you have joined us today, both in person and online. Again, if you're a visitor, make sure that you go over and check out the Welcome Center. There's some lovely people over there, and I hope that you have a blessed week, and please join us in singing. Amen.